Episode 3, Brackets and Buzz. Welcome back to the Brackets and Buzz sub-series, a sub-series from the new SEC podcast. We're going to talk about the Week 13 CFP rankings that just dropped on Tuesday night. A couple shifts, 2 teams dropped down in the rankings, a couple teams dropped out, some teams stayed the same, and there's a lot of chaos going on Twitter, on YouTube. Everybody has their thoughts about SEC bias, anti-SEC bias, Big 12 getting shafted. What are some of the main stories from you when you look at these new rankings?
It's all about, everyone wants to argue what matters more. Is it strength of schedule or product on the field? And really, personally, people can come for me for it. I think that the committee has a good balance of both. It matters that you schedule a hard schedule because they're keeping 2 lost teams in there. You got Georgia in there. You got Tennessee in there. They're 2 losses, but they're still going to make the playoffs if they win out. Maybe not with Tennessee, but with Georgia, Ole Miss, and Alabama. But they're also valuing the product on the field by saying, Indiana, you are undefeated. You're undefeated, so we're going to keep you up there. So yeah, it's a good balance of the two. So that's where I think people are too far in one camp or the other, and that's where I'm seeing a lot of the criticism.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could make that case, right? I think if we go from top to bottom, the criticism, I believe, starts with Indiana. You mentioned it because although they can still control their destiny, although they have the chance to beat Ohio State this weekend, there are 2 one-loss teams ahead of them in the conference, and you're wondering if that was Michigan or a different team, would they be ranked number 2?
No. So it's tough because I saw, watching the show last night, anyone who's watching this and saw Booger McFarland getting passionate about Michigan last year. They were 3 all the way through the poll. They beat an undefeated Ohio State, still only sat at 2. It took Georgia losing for them to finally jump to 1. So even then, they were valuing the strength of schedule amongst other opponents. They had a similar strength of schedule. Indiana, you control your destiny. And people are saying, Indiana's getting doubted by the committee, and that they're 5. If you were getting doubted by the committee, you'd be back with the other undefeated team, Army, sitting at the back of the bus at 19.
I mean, that's an extreme, though. That's Army's back of the bus because they're G5.
Sure, but if you're looking at strength of schedule, it's showing that they are valuing the fact that Indiana is undefeated. People say that Big Ten fans, non-SEC fans, are saying Indiana is being doubted. They're number 5 in the country. I don't know how they're being doubted. And they have a test and a reason to show that they should be number 2. They will be number 2 if they win the game this weekend. But on the other side,
it's like they've escaped the SEC bias because they're ahead of all the 2-loss SEC teams. But I don't know if they've escaped the Big Ten brand bias. But I hear where you're coming from, though.
Yeah, and if Indiana, if they were doubting Indiana, I'm not saying that they would be 19 with Army, but I think Alabama's better than Indiana. I think Miami's better than Indiana. Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee. And then we start getting into some questions after that. But they're ahead of those teams because the product on the field does matter. We can do hypotheticals all day long, but at least the committee is showing that if you go out and win your games, it matters. Me and you talked about this, and I'm not trying to steamroll the Indiana conversation. But when they came into the season, it wasn't supposed to be a weak schedule. They had the defending national champion on there. They had Washington. They had 2 playoff teams on their schedule from the past season.
Yep, and we talked about that.
Those didn't pan out. Those schedule didn't pan out. That's not Indiana's fault. They went out and took care of business. So this conversation of should we schedule an easy schedule, they didn't. It just turned out that way.
That's kind of how it is. I mean, look, I'm in agreement with you. And, we kind of, I'm paraphrasing here. We talked about what Nick Saban said on College Game Day, but we have a playoff finally where there's 4 teams at least that can guarantee, all these teams can guarantee their destinies to playoffs. If they want to guarantee a spot, you get to your conference championship and you win. It's been a debate over the last day or two since week 12 just ended around, does it make sense to go to the SEC championship game? And it's not playing itself right here in these rankings, but more so than anything, it's just been this debate. And it's like you said earlier, there's 4 guaranteed spots. The other 8 are up to chance.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one in there that's 50-50 where it's the G5, you've earned it, but you're up against other G5 teams. The best 4 teams will get in. And that is the conference champion. If you want to be one of the best teams, you win your conference championship. Yep. Everybody else, it's up to chance. If you want to see Georgia in the playoffs and you think that Georgia is the best team, then they should win their conference championship. If you think that Ohio State is the best team, then they should win their conference championship. Everybody else, it's up to the committee's discretion. Don't be mad when the committee devalues your team because they lost games and didn't win their conference. It's just the way it is.
It's just kind of the way it is, right? And they had a tough task with ranking, Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee. we think they kind of got it right. Alabama beat Georgia. Ole Miss beat Georgia, so both those teams are ahead of them. Ole Miss probably has one of the weaker losses on their schedule with Kentucky, but they're still getting the respect of beating a good Georgia team that beat a good Texas team. Texas sitting at number 3. There was 3 teams that lost this week, and only 2 of them dropped. So Tennessee dropped from 7 to 11, and BYU dropped from 6 to 14. The committee left Missouri there, and we'll get to Missouri because I have thoughts there.
Okay.
But there was only 2 teams that dropped in the poll this week from a spot that they were ranked to a lower ranked spot. There were a couple teams that dropped out: Kansas State, Washington State, Louisville, and LSU. Any thoughts on the teams that dropped, Tennessee and BYU?
Yeah. And when you're talking Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee, recency matters. Alabama lost early on. They lost by 1 possession. Recency and margin of victory matter to this committee. And that happens for both Tennessee and BYU. Why? I don't think that BYU should have dropped to 14, personally. I think that was a big slide. Beating SMU, I think they should be ahead of SMU. I think they should be ahead of Boise State. They have a ranked win on their resume. But they're looking at also the product on the field. It's not box score watching, but they're seeing that BYU had a lot of their games close. It was a last-minute play. It was a last-minute drive. And they could have very well been a 4-loss team, but you get it done. So that's why they're being, I guess, it feels like a rewarding by you're still up there. But I think that they should be higher because of the fact that they found a way to win those games.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm in complete agreement with you where I think that BYU should be ranked ahead of Boise State. I know they should be ranked ahead of SMU since they beat SMU. SMU people will say that Kevin Jennings didn't play that game. There was only 2 drives that Preston Stone played, so that was a full good SMU team they played against with the new Kevin Jennings at quarterback. BYU should definitely be at 12. Maybe I've argued that they should be above Tennessee. The SEC, I love the SEC. This is a new SEC podcast, but we got 4 ranked 2-loss teams ahead of a 1-loss Power 4, conference leading team. To me, I get they've played some close games, but there's still something to be respected about leading your conference with top talent. I get it's not the SEC, but leading your conference and having that target on your chest every week. Not saying that Ole Miss and Tennessee don't have that same target. It's a little bit different in the Big 12 because every team is a little bit more even. And so I think they should be ranked probably about 11. Okay. But BYU still does control their destiny. That's the thing. It's like all these conversations can always fall back to you still control your destiny. The teams that are, whining will say that maybe don't control their destiny, Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss. They're saying maybe that they don't want to play in the conference championship game. But if you control your destiny, we talked about it. I can't put words in Nick Saban's mouth, but I don't think he would say something like that.
No, and there's a benefit to it because especially if you're an SEC team, you play in the Southeast, you might have to go up and play in the cold, but that's a whole other conversation. BYU, they control their destiny. I guess we can start getting into maybe a hypothetical here with BYU. They play Arizona State. We saw Arizona State jump into the rankings. We saw Iowa State jump in. Now we have 4 Big 12 teams. Should BYU beat Arizona State, lock in their spot in the conference championship and win that as well? Personally, I think that they would then go back into the spot for the bye. I don't think that Boise State winning the Mountain West and winning out looks as appealing as a BYU team that beats an Arizona State team. They're underdogs in this game, wins the Big 12. I think that this is just a small placeholder for BYU that's going to change. How do you feel? Do you think they'll jump Boise State if they win against Arizona State?
I think that they will jump Boise State if they beat Arizona State, considering that Arizona State's ranked. That would put Arizona State in their 3rd loss. So the committee's showing that they'll rank a 3-loss team like an Illinois, who barely beats Purdue, who's terrible in the Big Ten. So I think for BYU beating an Arizona State team that the committee values, and then just after that win, I would rank them above Boise.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. So I think while it feels like it tells you what the committee thinks about BYU, this is an opportunity. They ranked Arizona State. They know this game is this week. This is the opportunity for BYU. I heard it on the show last night, and it's all about how you take advantage of the opportunities. Indiana doesn't have a lot of opportunities. Take advantage of your one this weekend. BYU has opportunities, but you have a good one this weekend. Take advantage of it.
Take advantage of on the road too. Like that's a huge, the committee does show they value road wins. Mm-hmm. We've seen that in years past, and I think it's a part of the actual criteria. So that's a big opportunity for them going to Tempe.
Yeah, I think Notre Dame is hanging on a little bit to a road win when they played Texas A&M to start out the year. It's not recent, but that is holding a lot of weight.
Completely different quarterback too. Different quarterback.
completely different team. It's just something about the dynamic of playing a road game and what that brings to the table. So I think personally, with the way the bracket looks, when we look at the bracket, I think that looks fair. I think everything
Yeah.
looks good as far as the teams that are in it. Because BYU does get in. The winner of the
Yep.
ACC gets in, whether that's going to be Miami or SMU. I think it's fair that only one of those teams gets in, given the strength of schedule. Boise
Mm,
State getting in. I,
I, I think you could argue if Miami loses that they're still a top 12 team. I would probably put them in.
okay.
If they lose in the conference championship game, if they lose beforehand to Syracuse or Wake Forest, then they will be out of the conference championship game, and I think they'll be out of the playoff picture. But if they lose in the conference championship game, to me, the game control that Miami has had, despite a lot of the close games, just more of what this offense brings to the table. I think it's one of the more dangerous offenses in the country. We see it statistically. I think they can get in with SMU
Yeah.
or deserve to get in.
And you would see a Georgia or you see a Tennessee get booted for that Miami team, both having 2 losses, one coming from a conference championship. I think that those teams are better than Miami, but that's not the conversation. It's not a
Right.
hypothetical, right? So it's what teams deserve it. I guess we can move to that point because that's a good one to bring up is teams that lose in conference championship games. We did a whole segment on it. We can link that video about whether you even want to play in the SEC championship game. But I think in the conversations last night when they were asking, the commissioner of the committee, the chairman, what he would value in a conference championship loss, and he was like, I have great respect for the teams making it. We have to watch the game, and to me, that says that if you make a conference championship game and you lose it, as long as you keep it close, I don't think that they're going to hold that against you. Now, if you get smoked though, and the product on the field is bad, then I do think a team could drop out.
Yeah, I think if you get smoked and the product on the field is bad, you can definitely drop out. And I think that's pretty fair, right? Especially if it's a team like Texas A&M, where if you beat a good Texas team that's super respectable, we just need to see it consistently which Texas A&M team you'll get. I might get some flack for that, but that's okay. Ultimately the committee, we always talk about, they want to put the best 12 teams in, 5 spots are guaranteed. And after that, I think, having your last test be against the top team in your conference is a very good indicator on if you belong in the playoffs. And so you just got to keep it close. Like it's not asking too much. Like, right. Like I would say right now, Oregon's punched their ticket. Even if they get blown out, they're still making it in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They can afford that loss. But if it's Oregon, Ohio State, or Oregon, Indiana, if Oregon puts belt to ass on Ohio State for their second loss, and that's 2 times, last year we saw that scenario with Washington and Oregon, right? And there's only a 14 playoff, but you couldn't make a case for Oregon to get in when they lost to Washington twice. I don't know if you can make a case if it's Oregon, Ohio State, and they get dominated in that game.
Yeah, it'd be tough to see Ohio State drop from 2 to out of it, but it's tough because you're going to have multiple SEC teams sitting at home. There are a lot of these teams in the top 12, especially come end of the season, will be playing in a championship game. You'll have 2 of the SEC teams playing. SMU may find their way back in. You could see 2 ranked top 12 or bracket projected ACC teams playing. You'll likely not see 2 Big 12 teams that are going to be in the top 12 playing. You'll see 2 Big 10, but they're going to be sitting. Georgia might be sitting at home. Ole Miss might be sitting at home. Tennessee might be sitting at home. So that's a lot of teams that are sitting there.
A lot of teams sitting at home.
It would be hard to drop a team that's playing on Saturday behind those who were taking a bye week.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, like I said earlier, not all conference schedules are created equal, right? Like Penn State's schedule is not the same as Ohio State's schedule because Ohio State obviously had Oregon on it. In the SEC, we talked about Texas and Texas A&M schedule compared to the other teams that have had this round robin. And so in some of these scenarios, when it comes to making the conference championship game, it depends to me on which team gets in and which team that loses. Like if it's an Alabama that loses, their schedule's a lot tougher than A&M's. So I think that they could still get in with 3 losses.
I think so too. I don't want to reharp on our last segment, but we had the projections for that, and it drops them down to 70% chance of making it. Should they lose, if they don't make the game, they're likely in as long as they beat Oklahoma and Auburn. So it's interesting if you want to make the game or not. That's a whole other conversation that we've already covered. But a lot of these teams that need it, BYU, SMU, they're teams that need it, and they're going to be continuing to play for it. I think that if you are Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, or Tennessee, you should want to play because you don't necessarily control your destiny. ESPN FPI says that you do. I think for Alabama, maybe you do because you have that strong win over Georgia. but you lost to Tennessee.
Yep.
We can do the round robin.
We can do the round robin all day.
All year.
So your main camp was you wouldn't change too much about these rankings. We were in agreement that we would move up BYU. You would kind of you like their top 5. I'd put Indiana in my top 3 or top 2 actually. Anything else that kind of stood out to you from these rankings, or any questions you had?
No, I mean, I think I would put Indiana over Texas and Penn State, and I don't want to play the hypothetical which one's better, because I do think that they're better than Indiana. The product on the field, the result on the field matters. I don't think that anything that I would change would impact anything, right? Like if you move Indiana up, they're going to play Ohio State. It doesn't matter. I wouldn't move anything probably within the top 11 other than that. I'd put BYU at 12. It won't really matter because they're going to play a ranked game this week, and I think that they'll make that jump if they win.
Right.
A&M's fine. Colorado, I think it's a good spot. They're likely going to play in the Big 12 championship as long as they can take care of business against Kansas this week. Clemson and South Carolina will play. So that game will be a huge one to see what happens. I don't think that Clemson has the necessarily the resume to make a jump without playing in the ACC championship. With a lot of movement in front of them, South Carolina could make a case should they beat Clemson and some of these teams lose ahead of them.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. I mean, that'd be a strong Clemson win, a good out of conference win for them. And the football that they've been playing, just from a recency perspective, has been some of the best football in the country.
Yeah, it's some close losses, right? Like they got worked one time, but aside from that, you're looking at an LSU game, which we know the weird cases there. They're one bad hit away, and then they're a 2-point away from beating Alabama.
And you talked about that earlier when it comes to margin of victory, and margin of loss matters as well. Like we're seeing that with the committee also. I think that plays Boise State for sure, and I think it plays a role with Georgia as well, and kind of where they're ranked. But for sure with Boise State, speaking of, kind of margin of victory, margin of loss. One of the things that you had talked about, that was a question for you, was does IU make it as a 1-loss team? Because that's kind of been the talk of the town, right? Joey Galloway thinks they should bench their starter. The more rational CFB analysts are saying that Indiana has to keep it close. What do we think here at the New SEC podcast with a 1-loss Indiana, or how the game has to go for them to continue to have a playoff chance?
I think should they get worked, should this be a 20-plus point loss for Indiana, it'd be hard for me to see them in. Personally, I think, they should be in. But knowing what they did with BYU, I don't think so. They took BYU out with a close loss, and close resume all year, a better resume, a ranked win. They took them out. If Indiana gets worked in this game, I do think that they take them out.
Yeah,
it's unfortunate, but that's the difference of having multiple games to build your resume and having one game that the whole thing hinges on.
Right. Like Ohio State has the benefit of having 2 games. Technically, Penn State has the benefit of having 2 games because they're ranking Illinois, right? And there's a common opponent between Penn State. I think Penn State's playing Michigan this year, but for Indiana, I would say the committee will probably say they're out if they lose this game by a lot. And I think it has to be that way, because if you look at the other top Big Ten tests, the Oregon-Ohio State game was close. The Penn State-Ohio State game was close. If Ohio State dominates Indiana, that's putting Indiana in this bucket of Big Ten teams that's more towards the lower half, because that's the only teams they've done that type of performance against. And so, not saying that I don't think Indiana's really good, not saying they can't have a bad day, because teams have a bad day, but you talk about it, margin of victory. A lot of those SEC teams that have 2 losses have not lost by a large amount of points. So for Indiana to show that you belong on the same field, you have to win this game or lose really close.
Yeah.
Like, and or like lead. If you lead majority of the game and, maybe Ohio State wins in a field goal, the discussion is completely different. Like we'll sit here and say, okay, Indiana's a legit team. They've done some things at Ohio State that a lot of teams in the Big Ten have not done for years.
Yeah. So I'm saying that they'll get out should everything remain the same. But there's a lot of teams that have an opportunity to lose a game. 7, 8, 9, 11 could all lose a game. We could see Alabama lose to either Oklahoma or Auburn. We could see Miami lose to Syracuse. We could see Ole Miss lose to Florida this week.
Army could lose to Notre Dame, or Notre Dame could lose to Army.
Notre Dame could lose to Army. I mean, Tennessee could lose to Vanderbilt very easily. We've seen them, when they lost to Arkansas. So if all that happens, I mean, it's not a cut and dry case of is Indiana out with a loss. Should everything remain the same? I do think that it would put them behind Tennessee.
Yep.
If they lose this weekend by a lot. If they keep it close, I think that they sit right there around the 11 to 12 spot. And then it's
So,
up to what happens with the G5.
so then what do we do with Penn State and Texas then? Everyone feels like Penn State's just kind of hiding away here with this resume.
I mean, no loss for Penn State. They're going to sit. I think that when teams start to win conference championships and they start to back up, if Notre Dame does beat Army, they could jump them. So there's going to be opportunity for teams to jump them. I think if they don't lose, they're never going to be out. Texas has an opportunity to boost their resume. They're playing Texas A&M. They have the clear path to the SEC championship. Should Texas lose to A&M, I think that they're the worst 2-loss SEC team.
Yep. If they beating A&M is their playoff ticket. That's their playoff ticket to me.
That's the resume booster because they don't have one yet. They lost the game to Georgia and they lost it at home by a lot. By a lot more than the score would even indicate.
Yeah.
Not even a 15-point. It looked like worse than 15 points. So yeah, they'll likely both be in. I think that Texas does beat Texas A&M, and I think that Texas plays in the SEC championship against Alabama. If I had to put a projection on it right now, and that both of those teams make it, win or loss.
Texas and Alabama coming to Atlanta, and then the national championship coming to Atlanta. Could be fun times out here.
Alabama City, make it Alabama country out in Atlanta. But no, it'll be interesting. There's a lot of games left to be played. I like South Carolina versus Clemson. I think that's going to be a good one to showcase a few things. Miami and SMU could still lose games.
Yep.
Army and Tulane will play in the American Championship. That's
Georgia versus Georgia Tech. Georgia, like last year, that game was really tough. It took place out here in at Tech Stadium. This year, it's in Athens. That could be a close one. I mean, Tech upset Miami, so
playing spoiler.
Yeah,
Georgia is done with their SEC games, so this is the last test for them would be Georgia Tech. Yeah, if Georgia Tech wins that game,
don't sleep on the UMass Minutemen.
No. Well, I don't want to sleep on anybody. Any team to win.
You can sleep on UMass.
Nah, NIU. After NIU, I'm not sleeping on anybody. But if Georgia loses that game, I think it shakes up everything for the SEC because now Texas's loss looks worse. Alabama's win doesn't look as good. Ole Miss's win doesn't look as good. Tennessee's loss looks worse. Everything shakes up. I don't think that's going to happen. So yeah, right here at the end, Army and Tulane, they have the opportunity to take the G5 spot if something happens with Boise State. If Army beats Notre Dame, I think that they're better. They have a better resume than Boise State to take the G5 spot.
I agree.
And then rounding out, saw two Big 12 teams come in with Arizona State and Iowa State. These are the 4 Big 12 teams with BYU and Colorado that are vying for the conference championship. So I like that they're ranked. Missouri, not dropping. Tell me what you think. I know you had some thoughts.
Yeah, Missouri not dropping just doesn't make sense to me. I think they're ranked to kind of help pad the SEC teams in some ways. They don't have any quality wins, right? Like they have only lost to the best teams they've played, and it wasn't close. They lost to A&M bad. They lost to Alabama bad. They played South Carolina close, but 3 losses to me, and no, every other SEC team can say, okay, yeah, but we beat but we beat Georgia. Yeah, but we beat Alabama. Yeah, but we beat this team. Yeah, but we beat Texas. There's no yeah, but for Missouri. And so I just don't see why they're ranked at that spot. And that's just kind of my thoughts on it.
Is there someone that you would, not to put you on the spot, is there someone that you would see up there? I know you had talked about Kansas State being the one.
I think you could put Kansas State there because Kansas State beat Colorado and Colorado's ranked, right? Mm-hmm. So at least they have a ranked win. And to me, in that regard, okay, that would probably be the one team I would put in that discussion. Yeah, because I can't put LSU there, right? LSU doesn't have really too many quality wins outside of Ole Miss either. So yeah, I would in South Carolina. So I guess you could argue LSU for that in that regard, but I still feel like I would put Kansas State just from an eye test perspective over Missouri.
Yeah. It would benefit Boise State if UNLV and Illinois got shuffled in, and then Colorado State somehow made it in as a 3-loss team. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but the teams that have been ranked here at the end, it almost feels like a way to justify some certain end of season decisions that the conference is going to make. You ranked 100%. Illinois, that helps some Big Ten resumes here and there that may have been weak. UNLV, that boosts Boise State's resume, which honestly was a little weak.
It was pretty weak.
Just kind of relying on the fact that they barely lost to the number 1 team is their biggest asset.
And that was a big game when they played UNLV in the beginning of the season. So, like, props to UNLV for staying 8-2. I don't know their full schedule, but I know they did beat Houston this year. But
yeah,
I know that that helps Boise State a ton. So props to them for staying at 8-2.
Yeah. So wrapping up here, we'd like to talk a little bit about the hypotheticals for the bracket and what games might be fun here. BYU, Ohio State. Any thoughts on that one?
I think that would be a really fun matchup. Because that would be I think it'd be a good test to kind of see, BYU, they got their quarterback doing what he's doing. And on the other side, you got Will Howard, former Big 12 guy. I mean, I think Ohio State dominates. I just feel like the size of the players, it's just one of those, just I hate to, they always say, like, okay, if you just think it's based upon player rankings, just go off of, 24/7 sports. But I don't see in any world that Ohio State wouldn't just crush BYU, to be honest.
If I'm Ohio State, I'm like, stop the count now. We play BYU, winner plays Boise State. I'm like, stop the count now.
Stop the count right now.
Yeah. Now, other side, Alabama, Notre Dame. I've been on the camp that Alabama, you should want to make your conference championship game because you don't ever want to get stuck with a road game in December in a cold place. I think that they'd be fine. The pound the rock football is okay for that. But now, if everything ended today, they would find themselves playing Notre Dame on the road. That's a tough one. That's big. Rematch from 2013. So
rematch 2013. I think Notre Dame has a shot in that game. I think this is a good Alabama team. I think this Notre Dame team is hot. They're rolling. Obviously, they've won multiple straight. It's tough to win on the road, and playing football for these Southern boys in January in Indiana would not be fun.
No, and the winner of that game then has to go play Oregon. I think this is the worst draw that Alabama could get.
Yep.
That's why you want to go and win your conference game. I've been having some debates around that with some of my fellow Alabama fans and friends about what makes the most sense for Alabama. This does not look good. This is not appealing.
It's interesting because Oregon, or in this scenario, Oregon's got a higher seed, but they have a worse draw getting Alabama in the second round compared to Ohio State getting Boise State in the second round. And that's probably going to be the reality. Like, you just flip those two teams. Like, if BYU wins the Big 12, that they're going to be 4, and then Boise State probably will be sitting at 12. So, some people have been talking about this. There's a lot of people have been talking about this before the season started that really studied the bracket, formula and the format, said that the 5 seed might be a better seed than some of these lower seeds.
Yeah, 5 seed looks appealing. I don't think that Ohio State will be there. Oregon might not be at that seed because they are going to play probably in the Big Ten championship. So we'll see what happens. Georgia, Penn State. I like Georgia. I think that Georgia could win this game, but we have seen Georgia look weak at times and beatable. Penn State keeping it close against Ohio State.
I think that's gonna be belt to ass. Like, if I was a Georgia fan, I love a Penn State matchup.
Again,
I would love.
It could be snowing up there.
It could be cold, but I think they can handle it. I think they can handle it. They're not going to have enough offensively to keep up with Georgia. And not saying Georgia has this crazy high-powered offense, but that's just not Penn State's strong suit. I don't see them, having their way with the Georgia defense. So I would love that matchup if I was a Georgia Bulldogs fan.
I think it would be considerably closer. I used to live up there near State College, and December was cold. Keep the snowboard in the car. And I think that'll be tough for Georgia. When they're good, they're good. When they're bad, it's real bad behind Carson Beck. Right. So Ole Miss, Indiana, Ole Miss.
I think that one's a shootout. I think that one's kind of a shootout. I think that, Indiana might show them something. Clock me on this, because what Indiana does against Ohio State will vastly change how I feel about the potential playoff matchup with any team, and potentially Ole Miss. But Ole Miss's defense is I don't know if it's talked about enough. I just think Cignetti's got some magic going right now. I do love that matchup, though. Beautiful colors, the red for Indiana, and I would imagine royal red, and I would imagine that Ole Miss would probably come out in their powder blues.
Yeah, well, it won't be this way. Everything's going to shake up. Some big games this week. We got Ole Miss, Florida. We have Alabama, Oklahoma is going to be a big one. BYU. Playing a tough one against Arizona State, Colorado, Kansas. A lot of games are going to shake this up. We're going to do some previews for the SEC ones. We'll do another, brackets and buzz next week. Once the new rankings come out, I'm sure it'll all look drastically different.
Absolutely. Tell us what y'all want to hear on Brackets and Buzz. Thank you for tuning in. This is a new SEC podcast, Brackets and Buzz sub series. We got a really fun week coming up here, and we're excited to bring this back to you again next week.